Hello, everyone. This is John Hale for Country Cooked College Football again. I actually filmed this Stadium Series video earlier, but guess what? The microphone wasn't on. So we're going to do it now again. This is the ACC Stadium Series. I'm going to go over the ACC stadiums and see which ones I like the best, which ones I like the least, and the ones in between. And there's a lot, so we'll try to keep this real short, or as short as we can. All right, moving on. First stadium, Alumni Stadium, home of Boston College. You know what? I think that Boston College has an interesting stadium, an interesting location, and when somebody of note plays there, honestly, kind of a fun environment. But there's nothing sexy about it. There's nothing crazy about it. I don't think it's an amazing stadium. I think that it can be interesting whenever you get a good opponent there. So I'm going to put Boston College in the decent category. Nothing great, but nothing terrible either. Moving on, we're going to Memorial Stadium, also known as Death Valley, one of the two Death Valleys. Call it Death Valley number 2 because they lost in the national championship game, but it is Clemson, Memorial Stadium in Clemson, South Carolina. And yeah, you know where this goes. It is one of the best stadiums in the SEC, ACC, definitely one of the better ones in the country, and home of the most exciting 25 seconds in college football. So that's where Death Valley goes, right there at the top. Next up is actually Duke Stadium. This is Wallace Wade Stadium, and maybe it's just me, but I am not a fan of these horseshoe stadiums outside of Ohio State. Ohio State has the horseshoe, and it's awesome, and we'll get to that later. But what is up with these horseshoe stadiums elsewhere? And there's a few of them in the ACC, and I am not a fan. Duke is a basketball school. I'm preaching to the choir on that one, but I mean, you can tell that most everybody who goes to Duke games, they're not there for football. They're there because basketball hasn't started yet. I'm sorry, but Duke has one of the worst stadiums in the ACC, so they definitely belong down there at the bottom. Next up is the home of the Florida State Seminoles. This is Doak Campbell Stadium in Tallahassee, and this is honestly one of the better ones, just based on the history that surrounds it. It hasn't been up to snuff really because of the tenure of Willie Taggart and Charlie Strong. They just haven't been, or excuse me, not Charlie Strong. Who came before Willie Taggart? Anyway, I don't think that it's one of. I don't think it's been what up's to snuff, you know. I think it's definitely up there. So it's going to belong in almost the best, but not quite into the best yet, just based on recent history. Next up, I do believe that's Georgia Tech Stadium. This is Bobby Dodd Stadium in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. And it's got a beautiful backdrop. The backdrop is downtown Atlanta. It's a really nice stadium, but it's kind of the same thing as Boston College. It's interesting whenever somebody of note plays there, but there's nothing real sexy about it other than the skyline behind it. And plus, I mean, Georgia Tech's not a power. There's not really a whole lot of history outside of the Rambling Wreck, and the worst and the biggest blowout in history. But other than that, Georgia Tech kind of in the same place as Boston College, and so they'll go in the same category. Great, but not amazing. Next, we're going to talk about Louisville, Cardinal Stadium. And am I the only one who finds Louisville Stadium odd? I mean, it is a giant stadium for what they are. Louisville is not a football school. It is a basketball school. And it has a giant, proportionally speaking, stadium with triple decks. And Louisville's not even a big university, and yet they pack that out when I'd say 80% of the year. Interesting stadium. I don't think it's that great of a stadium since Lamar Jackson left, but I just think it's odd. It's an odd stadium just because of the size and the reputation that it has because it's newer. I'm going to put this in the okay category basically because it's just so weird to me that they have a huge stadium. Okay, so next up is Miami Stadium or Hard Rock Stadium. This is where the Miami Hurricanes play, and there are two examples of this in this conference. Okay, starting with the Miami Hurricanes. This is also where the Miami Dolphins play football. And what's weird is that like more people pack out Hard Life Stadium to watch the Hurricanes than they do to watch the Dolphins. I mean, for that reason alone, just because it's a newer stadium, it's in a beautiful location, and the team that plays there didn't really disappointed my expectations this year, but I think that they have potential. It doesn't really have history because it's newish, but just because it's newish, I think it belongs in the almost the best category, just based on that alone. I don't think that I think it's teetering between almost the best and decent. Really quick, we'll talk about this is Carter Finley Stadium where the NC State Wolfpack play. Another one of those stadiums that you're just kind of like, I don't know what to do with you. It's in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Raleigh is the sports center for both Carolinas. This is where the Panthers play football, and this is where the Hurricanes play hockey. This is and it's not where the Hornets play basketball. That is Charlotte, but still kind of like the center of the sports world in North Carolina. But it's not the main draw. For that reason alone, it's gonna stick right there in the okay category. Nothing great about it, nothing amazing about it, but it's not one of the worst. We'll talk about that later. Next, this is the other kind of NFL stadium we're going to talk about. This is Heinz Field. This is home of the Pitt Panthers as well as the Pittsburgh Steelers. This has the exact opposite issue as Miami does. They will pack it out for the NFL, but not really at all for Pitt. Mainly because Pitt has not impressed since Larry Fitzgerald has been there. And I mean, we know what it is. It is an NFL stadium converted to be a college football stadium for a fan base that is not all that powerful. It doesn't really pack a punch whenever it travels. For that reason alone, excuse me, with my typewriter. For that reason alone, I believe that it's going to go in the worst for the conference. Not exactly the worst there is. Definitely not. It is a better stadium than that. But as a college football stadium, it belongs in the worst. This is going to bring us to the Carrier Dome for the Syracuse Orange. And I think the Carrier Dome is honestly one of the more unique places in college football. It's also where Syracuse plays basketball. They got a rockin' fan base whenever they play at home because, I mean, it's Syracuse. Whenever Clemson comes to town or another big rivalry game, Syracuse is on the up and up. They had a down year this year, but I think that they got an amazing program just waiting to see its potential. I think it belongs in the almost the best category, but it's kind of teetering between then and decent. Then it comes to Kenan Stadium, home of the North Carolina Tar Heels. And, I mean, I got to say, this fan base has been galvanized since Mac Brown came in. And something's building in North Carolina, guys. You may not believe me, but I am a big believer in Mac Brown. I think that the North Carolina Tar Heels are going to be a pretty considerable opponent for anybody that wants to play them in the coming years. As long as Mac Brown is in control there, North Carolina is going to be a threat to anybody who's going to be playing them. For that reason, and since the fan base has been galvanized and it's not a great stadium, but I'm going to put it into the decent category, and that's mainly to the effect of what Mac Brown brings. Next, we're going to talk about this is the University of Virginia. This is in Charlottesville. This is Scott Stadium. Once again, same issue as Duke. I'm not about this horseshoe thing, and I'm also not about the University of Virginia's fan base. The only time that I can think about that they packed out a football game was this year whenever they played Virginia Tech, and that was a rivalry game, last game of the season, senior day, and they pulled off an upset when they were expected to do so. I am not about Virginia's football fan base. Basketball fan base is great, but their football fan base, not so much. That's why I'm putting them at the bottom, one of the three worst. But then we're going to talk about one of the best coming right back, and it's their big brother in Virginia Tech. Lane Stadium, home of Inner Sandman and an amazing fan base that is always rocking. The students at Virginia Tech are crazy. And this is coming from a guy who just can't stand Virginia Tech just based on their colors alone. I mean, I've tweeted about this. I can't stand their color combination, but in terms of a fan base and the environment that they make, it's one of the better ones in college football. That's why Lane Stadium is going right at the top as one of the best in the conference. Finally, the last one in the conference is this is the home of Wake Forest. This is BB&T Field in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And there's nothing great about this. There is something there that if you are a Wake Forest fan, you are a diehard Wake Forest fan. There's just not a lot of you. But whatever you're doing, it's better than this half horseshoe thing. I think that it's an interesting field if they feel like they can pull an upset. It's not a big stadium at all, which kind of means that like it's more intimate to me. It belongs in the okay category, but barely. So there you go. There's my tier list for the ACC. Duke, Pitt, and Virginia with the worst. Louisville, NC State, and Wake Forest with simply okay stadiums. Georgia Tech, Boston College, and North Carolina with decent stadiums. Florida State, Miami Hurricanes, and Syracuse with almost the best. And the two best in the conference is Clemson and Virginia Tech. Follow me on Twitter at College Cooked and on YouTube. Please subscribe. Check back with me soon as we will go over the Big Ten is next up right here. Thank you.